Well, hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard and this is Lap of the World. Normally your home for road trips and racetracks, except for, of course, we are currently under quarantine and not leaving our house right now. So we can't bring you our usual track and travel style of content. Nonetheless, if that does sound interesting to you, don't forget to click the subscribe button down below along with a bell, and that way you will get a notification anytime we either upload a video like the one today, or once we are, fingers crossed, eventually able to get back out into the world, get to some new racing circuits and take you guys along for the ride with us. In the meantime though, we've had to find some other things to talk about. My last video was an overall cost comparison between my 1992 Acura NSX that you've seen a lot of on the channel. It has 283,000 miles on it, and I've owned it for 11 and a half years at this point. And we compared that to my new-ish to me 2004 gated manual Lamborghini Gallardo. Now that video actually, I think, created more questions than it answered. And that's a little bit of what we're here today. A lot of those questions revolved around the breakdown of the expenses on the NSX, in fact, as well as asking after some other kind of ratios that we'll get to towards the end. So what I've done to answer a lot of these questions is I've actually taken, many of which I should say, revolved around the split between what of that money did I spend maintaining the car and what of that money was spent modifying the car. I am actually not I'm not a usual suspect or a big offender with the modification side because I've done so much fixing. I've done some, some things to taste and a couple of things. We'll get to that. What I've done though with my spreadsheet is I've broken it down into several categories here of spend, starting with maintenance parts, not to be confused with mods, service, where I've paid somebody else to do something to the car for me, modifications, and I've got a couple of subcategories there that we'll talk about. Then consumables, which deals a lot with the consumable section is definitely exacerbated by the track use, but would still be applicable to most cars, just not at the same replacement frequency. And then just a couple of other odds and ends types of categories that we'll discuss. At the end though, that's where we'll make it kind of interesting. We will actually get down to a dollar cost per mile driven figure, which is something that was asked about by several people after the previous video, both for the NSX, and I'll throw in the figure for the Lamborghini there as well as a bonus. For another data point, I also wanted to look at a couple of other, we'll call them high-profile Honda Acura products that are out there in the social media world that we'll get to at the end of the video as just a kind of a point of comparison. But for now, let's get started into our categories. So first, let's talk maintenance parts. I use the term maintenance parts just to make sure this is distinguished from modification, mod parts. This was quantitatively the largest category. In other words, this is the most rows on the spreadsheet, even though it wasn't the most expensive category. There were 160 something rows. Most of those rows accounted for more than one component. I put the receipts in as a single line item and kind of noted what all was on the receipt. So yeah, I'm probably, a small shout out here, I'm probably the first generation NSX customer of the decade with Harper Acura here locally in their parts department. But yeah, so the average cost of a part that I replaced on this car, or average cost of a receipt for some job I was doing on the car, was $273. The most expensive single part that I've replaced on the car, in fact, the only part I've replaced on the car that was more than $1,000 as a single item, was the replacement transmission after the snap ring issue finally came back to bite me in 2017 after another 40,000 miles on the car after when I purchased it at already 211,000 miles. So again, if you're looking for an NSX and you see it's in the snap ring range, it doesn't matter how many miles are on it, it's still a hazard. So, but yeah, the total tally dollar-wise for maintenance parts, $9,750. And that lets us move on then to service. The service category is actually the largest category by dollars spent. That is actually in spite of me doing, I would say, the majority of the work on the car myself. There's not a lot that I won't dig into on this car. I did the entire, we'll get to this when we get to the modification section, but I replaced the entire ABS system on the car myself. I've also done the entire exhaust system myself. I've replaced or fixed or dug into a lot of the electrical componentry of the car myself. So there hasn't been a lot that I've outsourced, but what I have outsourced either was very invasive and therefore expensive, or was something I just did not have the facilities to deal with. In that first category of big ticket items, I also got some comments. They were like, hey, you could have saved yourself a lot of money by consolidating that work into one shop bill. Yeah, that would have been ideal, but that's not how it happened. My car has seen, in my ownership of 73,000 miles and 11 and a half years, it's seen 3 timing belts. Technically 4 if you count the one that it came to me with. The first timing belt I did as a precaution because I had absolutely no faith in the records that came with the car or the word of mouth assurances I got from some gas station in New Jersey. I called them after I bought the car. I was like, hey, did you guys actually do the timing belt? Can you give me a date on that? Do you have any records? And they're like, yeah, bro, we did all that. And excuse my terrible Jersey accent there, but it was not exactly confidence inspiring. So I had it done as a precaution right when I got the car. The next timing belt was after, I believe, when I was having the head gaskets done. So the car started to push a little bit of coolant. It took forever to track it down. Eventually kind of isolated it to, I've eliminated every other possibility but some small flaw in the original head gaskets. So I had them changed before anything really catastrophic happened to the updated MLS versions. That was done as a service. At the same time, since the heads are off the car, may as well do the timing belt again while we're in there, just to reset that clock since there was no additional labor. At the same time, I also did the oil pump. Normally you just do a timing belt with a water pump, but I also had the oil pump done at that point in time as well. The third timing belt that I've put on the car was after the balancer pulley delaminated, or the harmonic damper delaminated from the balancer pulley. Little rubber puck chewed its way most of the way through the timing cover. It did not get to the timing belt to break it and kill the car or really damage the engine, but again, I also had no confidence that there wasn't just a bunch of plastic trash that had been thrown through the timing cover, because it did have holes in it. It just had not gone all the way through it. So again, as a precaution, timing belt number 3 happened. So, and then the transmission, of course, that replacement was kind of unavoidable. And that was done in a shop. And that was Source One in Ohio that did that for me. The other shop bills that I've had have largely been one of 2 things. 2 very distinct categories of stuff. Alignments, probably half dozen or more of those to the tune of between $60 and $120 a piece. Most of those were me taking something apart in the suspension, putting it back together, and then having to go line the car back up. That's happened a number of times. The other category were tech inspections. So track tech inspections, take it to a shop, put it on a lift, look everything over with a fine-tooth comb. Those, again, kind of $100 to $200 operations, depending on anything else that needs to be done at the time. Normally, I do self-tech. So I will look over my own car. I have enough experience with it. I've done enough track days. Again, all the stuff you would check in a normal tech inspection, I have replaced myself more than once, certainly. So I'm pretty well versed there. However, once a year, I will usually take it over to my friends at European Auto Garage here in Knoxville and have them take a second set of eyes on it, because you look at something for long enough, you're bound to eventually miss something. And that's just kind of a safety precaution on my part. Other times I've had tech inspections done because organizing bodies require it. They won't let you self-tech. You have to bring in a tech form that has a stamp of a certified shop on it, or they won't let you on track. I think the Ferrari Club comes to mind. They do that, I know. So those are the other 2 big categories. There were some big ticket items in the service category, and then there were also a bunch of little but not inconsequential items that kind of added up to that total of nearly $16,000 that I've paid someone to work on the car. So I've paid about as much in service as I did for the car in the first place. The hope is going forward that number goes down because I have a better facility to work out of now and I can do more here. But that's where that landed. And we will then, with that, move on to modifications. With the modifications, I actually split this out into two subcategories because I think there is some gray area here. The first category is purely optional modifications, like stuff I did because I wanted to, either to make the car look like I wanted it to look or go like I wanted it to go. The second category are what I am referring to as resto mods. In other words, something was distinctly wrong, and the primary driving motivation for me to make the change of the part was to fix the problem. However, I also was able to take advantage of the fact that technology has moved on in 20 odd years from when I bought the car, or it accomplished some other, ancillary nice to have at the same time. So it was definitely fixing something, but it was also more than just fixing something. So I couldn't justifiably put it in the maintenance part category. So we'll get to some examples of that here in a second. So first of all, though, the purely optional mods, my car is modified to the tune of just over $8,000. The costliest single mod were the Advan wheels I had on it for a while. More on those here later. The costliest category overall, though, has been the exhaust stuff. And that's mainly because I replaced the exhaust components early on, so did those modifications, and then those actually wore out, and I replaced them with new, better aftermarket exhaust components much more recently. The average cost of a modification, of an optional modification from, this is all modifications. Average cost of all of my modifications was about $269, which is about the same average as my maintenance parts cost. That ranged from the cheapest mod I could see on there was a rubber plug, $2.70 to cover up the hole where I deleted the broken power antenna. Then you had some $30 centering rings for the wheels, and as an example of something a little more expensive, $280 tinting the windows. I know some of you in the Southeast and Florida in particular would tell me that window tint is not a purely optional modification, but in my books I kind of had to fit it in there. For the resto mods, we're looking at things like the coilovers on the car. The shocks were blown. I had the option to go back with something like maybe a less expensive insert, or the Bilstein system that's pretty popular. But I went with some KW variant 3s because I knew I was going to want to track the car, and those seemed like the best option for that at the time. Also, the 2001 anti-lock brake system conversion. Again, that would be a modification. It's kind of an OEM plus modification, but nonetheless is a modification. That was brought on because the original ABS pump in my car died. Now, I could have gone back and replaced that pump, but for not a whole lot more money, I was able to update the system to one that was far less stupid, far less heavy, and that has been zero trouble since. No exercising or bleeding or anything else. I just haven't had to think about it again, and I don't regret that at all. In that as well, I've got some Science of Speed braided brake lines. Again, old brake lines are kind of crusty. You replace them, may as well replace them with the best thing you can get. Coolant tank is aftermarket because the original cracked. The seat covers, I gotta count them in this category because I did make a little bit of a change. I had the perforated leather put in them, but they were definitely fixing something that was broken at the time. Also, just small stuff like I've got some billet, the Science of Speed as well, got some billet double O-ring cam plugs to replace the factory kind of plasticky items there. And again, for not much additional expense, I'm able to get a much better part, but it's distinctly fixing a problem. They were leaking, so you do what you do there. So that's where I kind of get that gray area in the modification category. But the resto mods were just not quite $5,000 for an overall in that category of just shy of probably like $13,000, $14,000 overall in that category. I'm being very rough with that, but we'll get to the actual hard math here at the end. So the last major category I'll talk about is consumables. In this category, I have two major ones, tires and brake components, kind of combining pads and rotors into one big category there. Obviously, these categories are exacerbated by the fact that I track the car. In a given season, if I do as many events as I want, I kind of expect to go through 2 sets of tires. Maybe I can fudge that a little bit if I flip them on the rim to even out camber wear, or if I just change rears instead of changing rears and fronts. But I like to change them as a set because you get the difference in heat cycles, makes difference in grip, and that can upset the balance of the car, or not upset it, but change the balance of the car on track when you're at or near the limit. So I've probably made it a little worse for myself in that regard. But nonetheless, over the years of tracking the car, I've spent about $4,500 on tires, probably closer to $5,000. I'm sure I might be missing a set there somewhere. And then brake components, including pads and rotors, which brake pads, I expect to get about 3 events out of a set of Hawk HP Plus, if those are 2-day events at a track that's kind of average wear on brakes. Rotors are cheap on their own. I expect for them to go half a season. It does depend. If I start going to events early in the year like I did this year, where you have some cold ambient conditions, then they tend to crack. And that's applicable to any set of rotors I've had. I've gotten some brand name rotors, and I've also gotten some less than brand name rotors. And usually I just get the cheapest thing I can find, because no matter what, if you go out on a 45-degree ambient day, heat your brakes up to 700 degrees, and then drive through a puddle on your way back to the paddock and splash water on them, there's a good chance they're going to crack if you've managed to heat cycle them enough times to have the little, what I would call checkering on the face of them. But I take spares with me, so it's usually not a big deal. The pads, for the record, run about, I would put an average at about $200 a set for the whole car for the Hawk pads that I use. The rotors, I can find them for, if I find them on sale, I can get them for $20 a piece, 20 to 30 bucks a piece. And if I find them cheaper than that, I'll usually get a stack of them. That way I have them laying around. So they're probably the smallest portion of that. But I've spent about $1,500, again, you could probably round that up to $1,700 over the years on brakes, mainly pads. And that leaves us with the last 2 kind of odds and ends categories here. The first of those is legal expenses, and I don't mean that I'm getting sued at any point in time. It's more the original taxes when I bought the car, which were $1,200 or so, plus subsequent 11 years of registration renewals, and then a little bit extra for a custom tag last year, but as you do. The last category is actually where I was able to recoup some money. I did sell some parts over the years that I've deducted from the overall total. The most notable of those were the Advan wheels that I used to have. Those I sold for almost what I bought them for, because they're Advans and people want them. Those were also in great shape. I did also sell some test pipes that I tried for a while that made the car way too loud, even though they did add some horsepower. And a couple of solenoids from the original AGBS unit to help someone fix theirs. For someone for whom originality was very important, found a way to rebuild theirs, which is cool to see. But that's the last category there, and that got us to our total of around $44,000 and some change dollars from total expenses after purchase. Now, as for our little math problems of the day here, there were a couple of ratios people were after. The biggest of which was the cost per mile. First, for a baseline of comparison, I went on the internet and I found this. This is from Ed Bolian's blog way back in 2014, talking about exotic car ownership costs. I consider Ed at least an authority, if not an expert on the subject, so we'll assume these are close to real numbers. I've left a link in the description if you want to read the whole article of how he got to those numbers. For now, if we then take them, throw out the depreciation, interest, gas, and insurance, because the NSX isn't depreciating any further, I don't owe anything on it, and I didn't factor in fuel or insurance to my numbers, we end up with an equivalency of around 90 cents per mile. With that point of reference, I've actually beaten the curve a bit with the NSX, sitting at 62 cents per mile. So yay, even with track use, an NSX is cheaper to run than a, quote, typical exotic, unquote, as defined by Mr. VinWiki himself. That said, things don't look so good when you compare the NSX to some other notable high-mileage heroes in the Honda Acura community. Tyson Hugie and Josh Clymer famously have a Legend and TSX respectively, each with well over 500,000 miles. I reached out to Tyson, who dropped a 6 cents per mile figure on me for his Legend, and Josh published a video on his channel a while ago citing a 5 cents per mile figure for his TSX. Closer to a fair comparison, Tyson was also kind enough to open the books on his own 1992 NSX as an example of a car that has been fastidiously cared for in a more normal sense, but certainly still driven. That car in his ownership has run around 29 cents per mile. And for comparison, since I said I was going to do that, for the Gallardo so far, I'm at $1.87 a mile, and that may sound terrible, but that's a lot of front-loaded maintenance and de-pimping with the anticipation that I should be able to drive it for a while now without having too many big expenses upcoming. I even have some parts still on the shelf over here that I need to put on the car, but that are not in any imminent danger of causing further issues, so I'm kind of let it go for the moment. Pausing briefly again for a point of reference for the Gallardo, probably the most famous gated pre-LP Gallardo on the internet, the Stradman's original orange car is fairly close to my own in spec, excepting a few extra standard features that were available in 2006. I dug around and found a video of his from a couple of years ago, before all of the wraps and wheels and such, and at that time he was claiming about $1.33 per mile on that car. So there you go. That's hopefully all of your questions answered about where all the money went into my cheap NSX back there. So I hope that was entertaining. Again, I think a lot of that was probably exacerbated by tracking the car, and that's not even counting the activities cost. So none of the entry fees or lodging or gas or insurance, additional insurance and things like that would that would be not car specific but track specific. So oh yeah, these financial exercises during quarantine are entertaining, kind of entertaining in a way that makes you want to drink. So if anybody wants to reach out with beer or toilet paper, you can get to me at richard@lapoftheworld.com. But anyway, that's where we're going to call it for the day. I appreciate you guys watching. Again, if you enjoyed this, or if you're at least entertained by it, in your time of isolation, don't forget to subscribe. Click like below and leave a comment if you have any other questions that I did not cover in the video today. Until next time, I'm Richard, this is Lap of the World, and we will see you guys in the next video. If not, fingers crossed, at the track in the fall.